Hello and welcome back to Well That Aged Well. And this week I'm joined by Tsuyoshi Hasegawa, and we are going to discuss his book, The Last Tsar, about the abdication of Nicholas II and the life of Nicholas II. And we're going to talk about this, of course, as well during the episode, but what inspired you to write this book in the first place?
Well, the abdication of Nicholas II took place in a very concentrated, shortened period of 5 days. You have to understand that it took the French Revolution to put about 2.5 years in the French Revolution to put an end to the Bourbon dynasty. But in case of Russia, it took place in 5 years, 5 days. But that process was not really examined, and that's why I wrote this book.
Now, I know that we are going to get there eventually, of course, but I want to take a brief look, of course, as well for the life of Nicholas, and I want to begin because it's a little bit before Nicholas II, and I want to begin with Russia at the end, by the end of Tsar Alexander III's reign, and what was Russia like at the time of Alexander III? That, of course, Nicholas' father, and we are going to talk about how Nicholas eventually would get the throne as well. So, but let's begin with Russia by the time of Alexander III in the late 19th century.
Yeah, okay. The turn of the century that Alexander, Nicholas II succeeded Alexander III in 1894. Now, this is a great period of transformation. Russia was going through very, very vigorous modernization. In the industrialization, society is changing. The only thing that remained unchanged was the political system, autocracy. Nicholas II inherited the autocratic regime of Alexander III, and he had a chance to change the system according to the modernized state, but he failed to do so because he just stuck to the notion of autocracy. And his dream, his entire life, he and his wife, Alexandra, entire life was devoted to the notion that he is going to pass over the autocratic regime to their son, Alexei.
So, I want to begin, of course, with the upbringing and how Nicholas II met Alexandra. That, as you said, she would be the flame of his life and what he would devote himself to. So, and I also want to talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about his upbringing as well, because we have to kind of understand what made him such a terrible autocrat. And I think several historians, you included, have stated that he should have been an excellent constitutional monarch, but he was a terrible autocrat and monarch. So let's talk about what was there a lack of education there? Was there what in his upbringing, what made him so that he wasn't ready? Was there a lack of training from his father in governmental work that he made him such a terrible emperor?
Alexander III, Nicholas' father, was an autocrat in terms of physics is a tall, strong man. And he ruled over the empire and his household as an autocrat. Now, Nicholas, in contrast, was weak, and his demeanor was feminine, and Alexander III did not really, was kind of disappointed with his character, and therefore that Alexander III still very vigorous, and he intended to live longer, but so he failed to educate Nicholas in statecraft. He was a sort of playboy, having a pleasure. He was not trained in a statecraft. He received a good education, but a good education in a sort of homeschool system. And but this is a sort of a rote system, just memorization. And he was a good student, memorizing names and so on. But he never was
Never
trained,
excelled.
never encouraged to have an independent inquiring uh, inquiring mind. The only thing that he learned from that education was from his tutor. It's called Professor Dosseff. He was a very conservative, reactionary specialist in religion. That autocracy is compatible with democracy and constitution. And so that's the only very lasting sort of lessons he learned from the education.
So let's talk about arguably one of the biggest influencers in his life, how he would meet the Princess Alexandra. That would, as said, she would be this huge part of his life. And so let's talk about how they met, and because they were quite young when they first met and fell in love.
That's right. That Nicholas was very obedient to the parents, because I think he just, the Alexander III, his father, was such a towering figure. And then also, he was very close to his mother, from Denmark, Dagmar. And, but once, he always obeyed the parents' wish. But with one thing, that is, he just fell in love with the princess of, Alexandra, the Alex of the Darmstadt of German Principality. And that's the one that he only defied parents' wish to get married. He had a problem of getting married, because I think it's Alex was a very, very deeply religious figure and a Lutheran. She resisted in converting to Orthodoxy, which was very important to one of the conditions for becoming empress. But when Alexander III suddenly became ill, and he was dying, and then at that moment she decided to convert to Orthodoxy, and then the parents gave them permission to get married.
So it was this, like you said, it was despite their family. What was it about their family that made them not dislike Alexandra so much, despite that they didn't want them to get married?
Alexander, of course, outside, a German princess, and she was very serious. She considered all those the aristocratic balls and all those things sort of frivolous, and therefore she managed to alienate all those relatives and all those aristocratic circles. Of course, she resented, and the imperial family just abhorred the 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 well, alienated from the aristocratic circle and the high society. They decided they were going to just move to the Tsar Selo, was about 20 kilometers from the capital, in a separate palace. And therefore, the imperial palace was somewhat detached by the ruling elite of the Russian society.
So now let's talk about the death of Alexander III, because that is arguably one of the biggest moments in this story, or one of the moments in the story. And that one of the things that kind of struck me, and we are going to talk about this at the end of the episode as well. And one of the red line in your book is roads not taken, and it comes at this very moment in when Tsar Alexander dies. I believe that by one of these is murdered by one of his brothers, Alexander Ulyanov, who some history buff may be familiar with. I'm not gonna say anything more, but yeah, the murder of Alexander III obviously put Nicholas II on the throne as his successor. But even he admits that he is not ready for the throne. He hasn't been taught enough of, like you said, about the craft of statesmanship. This is where it's like we said about in earlier that it should have been chosen to be an constitutional monarch instead of a autocrat. So what? Let's talk about one of the roads not taken here on the Nicholas II ascending to the throne.
Alexander III was a true autocrat. Father Alexander II, as you know, carried out great reforms. Great reforms emancipated serfs and created some self-governing institution, military reforms, and so on. The only thing he did not do was to grant constitution. He was assassinated on the day that he was considering granting sort of limited form of constitutional system. Now, his son Alexander III thought that all those efforts to grant reforms were a mistake, and then he wanted it back to that. He carried out a series of counter reforms, right? And to turn the history clock back, all those liberal activists during Alexander III wanted to crown the edifice when Nicholas II accepted the throne. That is, to crown the edifice, to complete the great reforms by giving constitution, and to which Nicholas said, "This is a nonsensical dream. We will never grant that constitution to Russia. We're going to go back to the autocratic system that my father had insisted." And so that here he lost a great chance to reform the political system according to the, in the context of the modernization at the turn of the century. And that's a golden opportunity that he missed. Senseless dream. That's a famous speech that he says, "This is a senseless dream. I'm going to uphold the autocracy that my father had held, and I am going to pass that autocratic regime as exactly as I received from my father to my son, Alexei."
So, do you think that if Nicholas II had become a constitutional monarch, that the history of Russia would have been different, and do you think they would have still entered the war, and that there still would have been a revolution in 1917? And we are, of course, going to talk about this very soon. But we have to go. I feel like we have to go through this part as well first before we get to the revolution. But do you think that if if Nicholas had become a constitutional monarch, that it would have been inevitable with the Russian Revolution anyway?
Well, I think that from the accession of Rome to the Federal Revolution when he became, there are a number of opportunities where he could have instituted a system towards constitutional monarchy. That is, well, when he acceded to the throne, this is the first I mentioned already. But in 1905, there's another first Russian Revolution there, and the Russian autocracy was almost toppled, and he made a concession and by issuing so-called October Manifesto that he is going to create a parliamentary system and guarantee bill rights. And it was a concession. I mean, he barely sort of survived, the autocracy barely survived by this constitution. And here is the second chance that he could have developed a constitutional monarchical system there by developing the new institution, Duma, as a really genuine parliamentary system. But he resented that he just made that concession under duress. He never, he never thought that the Duma was it was a mistake. In other words, the mistake that he made under duress, and then he never he considered the Duma as a sort of a hostile system impeding to obstruct the autocratic system. This is the second chance. There's another chance. That's with the outbreak of the war. There's a national enthusiasm there, right, and supporting the war, that he could have created the kind of political system, national government that gained the confidence of the nation to carry out the war. But he never did that. He never invited the Duma leaders, the liberal leaders, into the government. So this is the third chance, the outbreak of the war. There's another chance. I would say this is probably the last chance in August 1915, when the Duma liberals demanded demanded that the formation of the government, that basically the coalition government of government and the liberal leaders. But he rejected it outright, and instead he decided to change the position of the commander-in-chief. He decided to take over the supreme commander-in-chief. He's going to lead the war, and then that meant that he left the capital and the vacant in control over his wife Alexandra and Rasputin. And that's, I think, the last time that he missed opportunity. And then after the Alexander and the Rasputin was gained, and the Tsar's prestige sank to the lowest point, and he managed to eliminate the entire segment of society. So that's led to the final denouement of the collapse of the monarchical system during the February Revolution.
Now, we are before we get to Rasputin, I want to talk a little bit about Nicholas. Actually, before we do that, I want to begin with Rasputin, and as you know, he has quite a few children, and he had one son, Alexei, who of course suffered hemophilia, and this was very serious. There were no real treatment for hemophilia at the time. So, and of course, being the spiritual family that they were, Russian Orthodox, very Orthodox family that the Tsars were, they of course met this monk that, and I'm sure people know who I'm referring to here, which is, of course, enter Rasputin into the Romanov's life. So let's talk about how he healed Alexei. And I believe some historians say that it was more of a lucky coincidence that Rasputin managed to heal Nikolai. Sorry, Alexei, as a that it was not really spiritual. It was more pure luck that he was able to heal Alexei. He was there at the right time, at the right moment. That, and let's talk about Rasputin's involvement in, because he is of course I would say very important key factor to both both what would happen with the Russian Revolution and the and what would happen in the years of the Great War. So let's talk a little bit about Rasputin and Rasputin's involvement in the in both in the Russian government and the Romanovs' lives.
Well, one of the obligations of the empress was to produce an heir. And Alexandra gave birth to many daughters, but every childbirth was a girl.
And if I may interrupt you for one moment, but I want to also add that many people who may be familiar with Russian history know that there have been 3 female empresses, and they may be wondering why shouldn't any of the daughters to become empress, because there has been female successors in almost 3 in a row at the time of right after Peter the Great. So you might be wondering, why shouldn't one of the daughters? Well, that is of course because Paul, I believe it was Paul who, I was about to say Paul II, but Paul I, who would hate his mother Catherine the Great so much that he signed in a law that no female successor could ever succeed the throne of the Tsar. So one of the reasons a male heir was so important, that none of the daughters, which probably could have been better choice if you ask me, for a successor, that none of them, that's one of the reasons none of the girls could actually succeed the throne, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it has. We have to go back to Catherine the Great's reign. Catherine the Great became the empress by killing his weak husband, and they have a son, Paul. But Catherine and Paul did not like each other. Catherine did not like Paul, Emperor Paul, and he preferred the grandson Alexander I, then later Alexander I. And Paul resented this, and Catherine the Great reigned many years. And when Catherine I died, the throne went to Paul. And the first thing Paul did was to change the law of succession. That is, prohibited women to become a Tsar. And the Tsar, the throne, the male heir, right? And so that's the way the law of succession will, the imperial, the son, the first son becomes the first in line, and if that is extinct, becomes the emperor's brother, but no emperor's daughters. I mean, that's the way that it worked, and this became it was built into fundamental law, and this is succession law. It's very important, and it is during the abdication drama. It becomes a very very important issue during the abdication drama. Now,
back to Rasputin, and we don't have to talk about, of course, his involvement. I just wanted to mention this because, not many people may not be aware why there should not be a female successor to the Romanov line, and I just wanted to point out why this was. But let's go back to Rasputin and his involvement in, like I said, healing Alexei as Alexei's hemophilia.
As I said, that Alexandra was a very religious person, and But that she gave birth to many daughters, but not son. What a disappointment, right? But finally, she gave birth to son Alexei. They were delighted finally that the heir that they acquired were. But this happiness turned into a sort of nightmare a few months because they turned out that Alexei has a sickness of hemophilia that he inherited from his mother. And this was kept secret because of hemophilia and becomes a public, then I think there's a grave probable succession. And so that Alexandra and Nicholas saw various ways, but hemophilia at that time was an incurable disease. Hemophilia, you cannot stop the blood. And so what Alexandra just saw prayers and religion trying to find the ways, and they find that sort of natural healer in Rasputin. Rasputin, for some reason, various reasons, mysterious reasons, the lack of stop bleeding that hemophilia and Alexei. And then there, Alexandra and Nicholas agreed with her that his Rasputin was sent by God. And here she came to she had the idea that he was sent from God and to save Alexei, not only Alexei, but save the monarchy. And so that, so Rasputin's influence grew, and she was completely convinced of this, that the Rasputin sent from God, and relied on Rasputin's advice. And that's particularly after the summer of 1915, this Rasputin's influence grew, particularly in the area of appointments and dismissal of the ministers. And from 1915 to February Revolution, there's a phenomenon called ministerial leapfrogging. That is that the successive, prime ministers, foreign ministers, finance ministers, and also the Rasputin's, the people who, the ministers who criticized Rasputin and Alexandra were dismissed immediately, and their favorite became appointed. And hence, there's a total degradation, decline of prestige of the government. And then I consider that Rasputin's influence is one of the very, very important factors for the class of the monarchy.
So let's talk about Alexandra and Rasputin's involvement with the government and the Duma, because I was thinking about this as I was reading your book. She really is kind of a Russian version of Marie Antoinette, if you will, to try to meddle with the government in not a very successful way. And I can't help but feel doing a comparison to Marie Antoinette when it comes to Alexandra and her trying to control Nicholas II. And here again, it kind of got to show, I hate to say this, but what a weak man Nicholas was, because he kind of obeyed her, everything she said, and almost every government official she appointed, or wanted dismissed, he kind of obeyed her wishes to whatever her and Rasputin wanted to. So that kind of goes to show how weak Nicholas II was, and I can't, like I said, I can't help but think that she's kind of a Marie Antoinette of the time.
Yeah, I think that you're right. Yeah, that they were they were totally, because of the Rasputin's influence growing. There's a sort of outcry from not only from the liberal circles, Duma politicians began to criticize the dark force that is influencing the government policy. But not only liberals, but also that their influence became a concern of even their relatives. Nicholas' mother, for instance, okay, Nicholas' brother, Nicholas' aunt, Nicholas' cousins, they trying to counsel Nicholas to get rid of that influence of that force Rasputin, right? And Nicholas and Alexandra totally oblivious, totally indifferent, totally hostile to that Christian, and they sort of they just totally ignored, and that further alienated the imperial couple. And then you have to understand Rasputin was assassinated. Assassinated by whom? By the monarchists who were concerned about the dark force Rasputin's influence. Right? And then after that, of course, Rasputin's assassination, that all the political forces, the liberals, as well as the monarchists, even Nicholas' relatives, begged Nicholas to make some kind of political reform so that you can regain the confidence of the government. And Nicholas and Alexander totally rejected that. And they retreated into Cancun, all right? And they were totally alienated from all kinds of society. That eventually led to the February Revolution and the abdication of Nicholas. So particularly important is the important role played in the military. Military is played a very crucial role. Some liberals, for instance, they engaged in a sort of past conspiracy to remove the influence of Alexander. And then some of the military leaders supported that conspiracy on the eve of the revolution, so that the entire society, the liberals as well as the military leaders, deserted that the Nicholas and Alexander, even before the February Revolution, that really prepared for the abdication drama in the February Revolution.
So let's talk about one of the greatest events that would help shape the February Revolution in the first place, and that is the Great War that would enter Russia against Germany. So let's talk about the Great War as well, and that would eventually lead to the February Revolution in 1917.
Yeah, I think that the Great War, I think is very, very important. The outbreak of the war was enthusiastically supported by all walks of society, and yet Nicholas II failed to display the leadership. Russia suffered a defeat from in the beginning.
If I may, sorry for interrupting you again, but I remember reading about this and about the Russian Revolution a while back, and I think it was early 1905 or something, Nicholas was at a party with a British diplomat, and he said something that Russia is decades behind Europe on military technology and warfare, and he even admitted that they were so far behind in military technology that they
Right,
couldn't even fight.
after the defeat of Russo-Japanese War, Russian military, particularly in the Third Duma, the Stolypin's leadership, Stolypin, very capable Prime Minister Stolypin, and together with the Duma leader Guchkov, they carried out modernization program, and they were on the way modernizing, and then Russian military capability was not far behind, compared to Germany at that time, after the war, technologically speaking. That the most important is a political system that plagued the prosecution of the war.
So let's talk about what the execution of sending troops to what we just for that I just would technically be the Western Front, but for Russia, but as we call it the Eastern Front from our perspective, of course. So let's talk about the execution of the war and how the logistical, I would say, nightmare for the Russian army to go against the Germans, and how eventually the lack of bullets and lack of equipment would cause disastrous consequences for the Russian army.
Well, I think in the first place, there was a division of civilian government with the military. It's a sort of dual the military system. And then in the front, the military commanders played a very important role, and the civilian could not control. So that the duality of the government plagued the prosecution of war. And then also another thing is that the armaments production far lag behind, particularly in heavy artillery. And this resulted in a shortage of weapons, and that that is strategic defeat in the first East Russian in 1914, and then the Great Retreat in the 1915. But in 1916, Russia did quite well with the Brusilov offensive. But here, I think that the most important thing to remember is not the military technology, military system, but I think that Russia was fighting a 20th century warfare with a 19th century political system. And that's probably the most important reason, and that's why sort of even during the war, another very important thing is that during the war, the Russian army, Russian officers, soldiers, pledged the oath of allegiance, not to the nation, but oath of allegiance to the Tsar, right? But during the long years of war, that their allegiance shifted. The Tsar was not, as I said, with Rasputin's influence, and Tsar and the imperial family became very unpopular, and therefore their allegiance shifted from the Tsar to the nation and the military. I think during the war, I think this shift of allegiance became very, very important, because there that it is their allegiance to the nation, and then that starts, with all those scandals of Rasputin and Alexandra, his prestige sank very low, and therefore that the army, the officers, and then the generals, I think, lost the confidence in the Tsar, and they shifted in order to save Russia, fatherland. It is better to get rid of the Tsar himself.
Also, that's one of the bigger factor is that absolutely was a misnomer was that Nicholas took complete control of the Russian army, which would be a disaster as well. But let's talk a little bit about that as well, and the consequences. And I want to talk about his brother as well. So what were, and compare both brothers who, forgive me, I don't remember his name at the moment, but let's talk about the brother as,
Granted, Michael. was
Yeah.
about
Let's talk about
Nicholas
the
was
relationship
10
and
years
yeah.
young.
So let's talk
Yeah, the
about
relationship between
Nicholas II taking over and the disastrous consequences for the Russian army with Nicholas in control.
well, Nicholas was not trained in the military. And he wanted to he was a commander in chief, supreme commander in chief, and he just wanted to lead the war as a supreme commander in chief. That sort of decision, that his desire really shocked all of the military. The military was totally aghast because I think that Nicholas, not really military leader, did not
Kind of
know anything.
remind me of a certain military leader today.
Pardon me? Oh, yeah, okay. He was not, but on the other hand, so that he appointed reluctantly his cousin Nikolai Nikolaevich, Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, who was trained in the military academy, and he had experience, and so he was a commander in chief until 1915. Of course, by then that Russia suffered a great defeat in Eastern Prussia and in the Great Retreat, and he thought it was a time for him to take in charge. So he replaced his Grand Duke, who was, despite the defeat, he was still very popular among officers and soldiers. And they shipped him to the Caucasus. He became the Supreme Commander in Chief. But actually, that's only in name only. He was not involved in the strategy and the deployment. But only the extent to which that he was involved with the make appointment and dismissal of his the officers, and in many ways he appointed very incompetent commander, military leaders, and then again that was sort of alienated lots of military generals there, and so that was that his assumption of supreme commandership was also a very, very important reason why the military was alienated. He was assisted by very capable chief of staff, Alexeyev, and so that practically all the strategy and the decisions, the military decisions, were made by Alexeyev, and then Nicholas himself was not involved, and everybody knew that. And then particularly the military high command knew that Nicholas was not merely a figurehead, and so and then by the summer of fall 1916, it became very obvious that the position of rear production of military equipment and so far behind, and therefore the military was, particularly Alexeyev, was very concerned about the situation, and he proposed to create some kind of military dictatorship to combine the civilian and the military leadership. And it was rejected Nicholas rejected the proposal, and basically relied on the politicians favored by Rasputin, which totally alienated the military command, and then even Alexeyev and even his Grand Duke, his cousin Nikolai Nikolaevich, were consulted by the palace coup to remove Nicholas and Alexandra from the position of power. And so that's already, Yeah, go ahead.
So let's talk a little bit about let's talk about what I know you've been looking forward to talking about, and that is of course the February Revolution. Because those who may not be familiar with the Russian Revolution, is that there were two revolutions, and there was one in February by Kerensky, and then there was the Bolshevik in October Revolution or November Revolution, if you're going to follow the Orthodox calendar. But let's talk about begin with the Russian Revolution under Kerensky and the what made him succeed with the Russian Revolution in February.
But precisely, you're moving ahead. The Russian Revolution, the government, the Kerensky. Okay, yeah, you're talking about the February Revolution, the beginning of February Revolution. February Revolution took place on February 23rd with the workers' strike move. And that developed into February 17, the soldiers' uprising, right? When the soldiers' uprising took place on February 27, nobody thought that the monarchy would fall. But in 5 days, okay, it led to Nicholas' abdication, and then his brothers, Nicholas, uh, trying to transfer throne to his brother Michael, and Michael refused to accept the throne, and that's the end of monarchy. It happened in 5 days, right? And then you're talking about Kerensky's government. Well, actually, there's no Kerensky's government. This is first provisional government. Kerensky was simply Minister of Justice there. But no Kerensky's government, although Kerensky played a very important role in first provisional government. But yeah, that's your point, I think, is precisely the reason why I wrote this book. You talk about the February Revolution that led to February Revolution, Kerensky, right? And how did it happen? How did it happen? Okay, it's what happened. The abdication drama that plays during those 5 days are very, very crucial, and nobody paid attention to it. That's the reason why I wrote this book.
So let's talk about when Kerensky take power. Was the talk about just having Nicholas II still? Was a debate whether should Nicholas II abdicate or should they keep him as a constitutional monarch? They said that before that he always had this several opportunities into going into constitutional monarchy, but where the government so fed up with Nicholas II at this point that they just wanted to try to find a way to, get rid of him at this point.
Well, let's get back. Let's follow the process in chronologically. Okay, February 27th, there's a soldiers' uprising. Well, Nicholas II was after Rasputin's assassination. Okay, he went back to Tsarskoye Selo, his palace, to join his family. He was a supreme commander. The site of supreme commander, the headquarters was in a place called Mogilov, about 300 kilometers from Petersburg. Right? He went back after the Rasputin's assassination. He left Mogilov back to Tsarskoye Selo, and there he stayed until February 22nd. And finally, February 22nd, he decided, okay, I'm going to go back to the headquarters. And he went to Mogilov.
Bad mistake.
Yeah, so I'm going to take the leadership again, right? And 22nd. And then next day, the workers' strike began, February Revolution began. And then developed into soldiers' uprising, as I said, on February 27th. In the meantime, he received the news that his children became sick with measles, and he wanted to go back, right? And he decided, on the February 28th, he ordered his commanders to put down that revolution in Petrograd, by military means. And he left the general headquarters, Mogilev, on 28th, to join his family, because he was not concerned about capital, the Petrograd, because he said he's going to very easily put down the revolution. He went. So he he left Mogilev, right, and to join his family in South Korea. Well, who controlled the railway movement? Those are Duma leaders. Okay, the revolution took place in Petrograd. Duma leaders took over the control of the railway, and the Duma leaders did not want Nicholas to go back to South Korea, because South Korea, that means the palace, because Nicholas would be rejoined by his wife, and so that's and then they were determined to put down the revolution by military means. So Duma leaders just wanted to avoid that, right? And so the Duma leaders manipulated the information in the railway movement and blocked Tsar's train from going to South Korea. That's how Nicholas decided, okay, that I cannot go back to South Korea and go back to rather than going back to Mogilev, but he decided to the headquarters of the Northern Front, a place called Pskov. And Pskov, Northern headquarters, was headed by the commander who was most sympathetic to the Duma leaders. In fact, Nicholas II wasted 2 days, important 2 days, in the countryside. He was basically able, right? And so that by the time he reached Pskov, he reached there March the 1st, late evening in March, the situation in the capital went more radicalized. And then Duma leaders' position changed. That first, Duma chairman's name is Rozhenko, who played a very important role in abdication drama. Rozhenko's position changed from, you have to have to form a government that received confidence of the nation. That means get rid of all those aspirations to clique and to form the government that gained the national confidence. And as soon as that revolution spread and his position changed, now that's not enough. That's not enough. And you have to have a genuine constitutional government, right? And then just like 1905, Nicholas issued a manifesto granting a concession, granting parliamentary system, the Duma, right? And then that sort of saved the monarchy. So, in order to save the monarchy from the revolution, that you have another manifesto granting the regenerate constitutional government. And so, following that order, the military also concurred, and then with great difficulty convinced Nicholas to accept that constitutional reform. Remember, this is the reform that he resisted. He had resisted all along, because you remember, constitution and autocracy are incompatible. He finally reluctantly agreed to grant that constitution. But as soon as he accepted the constitution, Janko approached military leaders and said, that's not enough. That's not enough. The revolutionary insurgents are demanding the abdication of Nicholas. Abdication of Nicholas, I mean, that's probably Loryanko himself first to favor the solution, right? And the military, too, okay, and immediately accepted that recommendation. And Alexeyev maneuvered various commanders, right, in the front commanders, and managed to present a collective petition to the Tsar, right, to Tsar that Sire, that the nation demand your abdication, right? So finally, with the collective petition, Nicholas decided to abdicate, right? And then here, just another very important point here that the Nicholas abdicated, and the throne would go to his son Alexei under the regency of his brother Michael. That would have been a very totally legitimate succession, right? But when two Duma leaders came to Mogilov to negotiate and then extract that kind of concession, Nicholas changes his mind. Just, I love my son so much, I cannot part with him. And so I am going
And
to.
it's kind of wholesome when you think about it. His love for his family is kind of wholesome.
Yeah, family saga. I mean, he just here, he thought that the whole, he did not make a distinction between public and private. It's a private, succession to private matters, which is totally contrary to the to the law of succession and what the society expected. But anyway, so he double abdication for himself, for his son, and the throne was supposed to go. That he offered the throne to his brother, without any consultation with his brother, right? And so
Sorry if I interrupt you again, but I wanted to say that I never really thought about what you're talking about now. That until I read your book, I never really thought about the abdication as being illegal, and that there was a legal procedure to actually abdicate and so on. Like you said, it would have been legal if he had given the throne to his son and his brother as a regency, but I never really thought about the legality of the whole process of abdication before reading your book.
that's a very crucial point. Everybody knows that that's a illegal abdication, an illegal succession. His brother Michael, to whom that the throne was thrust upon, he knew that it was illegal, right? And then also that the illegal succession gave opportunity for various leaders to take positions. Here, Janko, I mean, the chairman of the Duma, he thought that the succession of the throne under Michael would never be accepted by broad segment of society. He opposed, and he had made an alliance with sort of unthinkable alliance with Kerensky that you mentioned. Kerensky was a revolutionary, socialist, very close to socialist revolutionary, revolution. He was a Republican. He was opposed to monarchy. And he had a really very popular among the revolutionary insurgents. And then also he had a sort of the bridge between the insurgent revolutionaries and left wing and the liberal Duma leaders. And so that he emerged, says a great opportunity that you take this opportunity to, enhance his position as a leader of revolution, so that he and Rozhenko conspire and put the pressure on Mikhail to refuse the throne. And then this is totally unexpected from the military leaders. Military leaders, Alexeyev and then others, were in conflict. How would you accept that compromise? Because I think it's very important that the allegiance of the two military armed forces to the new regime is very crucial, right? And then so that Alexeyev was really concerned about the division of the integrity of the armed forces, and therefore that he accepted that accepted that the end of monarchy, and he just basically threw the monarchy under the bus for the integrity of the armed forces. It is very ironic that two very men, Novchenko and Alexeyev, both are monarchists, two monarchists who played a very important role in ending the monarchy itself. And then, I think that the reason is that I think, I quote from Shakespeare that, the Julius Caesar says that Brutus loved Julius Caesar, but Brutus loved Rome more than Julius Caesar. I think they had both Alexeyev and Rozhenko are the more important principles, that values that they trying to elevate over the fate of the monarchy. I think that's the end of that's the gist of the abdication drama.
Were a majority in the Russian Duma in favor of abdication, or were there conflicting conflicting voices in the State Duma about abolishing the monarchy?
Well, Duma leaders were split. Actually, they were divided. The abdication drama was very closely related with the past struggle among the Duma leaders. I think three very important Duma leaders were Rodchenko, as I mentioned, this is the chairman, monarchist, chairman of the Duma. And another very important leader is Milyukov. Milyukov was a very important politician, the Constitutional Democratic Party. He was, and then Rodchenko and Milyukov were in past struggle. Who's going to become the more important leader? And to Rodchenko, Duma is a chairman of Duma. Duma's prestige should be elevated to become very important revolutionary organization. Whereas Milyukov considered, in order to diminish the role of Rodchenko as well as the Duma. He said the Duma was a relic of the old regime. The provisional government should take over. And there, ironically, Milyukov thought that it is very important to get the sanction of the old regime so that the provisional government could get the legitimacy from the old regime. Therefore, he was in favor of preserving the monarchical system. But he was overruled by Rodchenko and Kerensky, who both put pressure on Mikhail to refuse the throne.
Now we are going to round up soon. I just have a few more questions before we go, but let's talk about the Nicholas becoming going from Tsar Romanov to citizen Romanov, and how we went to bring a private citizen, or maybe not so private, but let's talk about him going from being a Tsar into a citizen, Romanov.
Well, one thing, he became private. Uh, what?
It's kind of a little bit poetic in a way that all the people that were exiled to Siberia by the Romanovs, and that the Romanov would end up being exiled to Siberia themselves. But nobody wanted them. Now, the final question I have is, again, as I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, I hope some of the viewers have thought about this as well. And if you read the book, you will find so many more. But one of the red lines in your book is the roads not taken. That there are so many opportunities that Russian history could have done different. And in your opinion, what are some of the roads not taken that could have changed Russian history for better or for worse? That you think that could have been, what are some of the biggest what's not in this period of Russian history? And if I may come with one myself, I think one, and I'm so sorry for interrupting you again, but one, if I may come with one obvious one, is the involvement of Alexandra and Rasputin in the government and their meddling with government policies. I think that is one road not taken. If that they had not had that much power in Russian politics, I think that's arguably one of the biggest what roads not taken if their powers had been diminished by Nicholas, and if he had been stronger and actually refused what they tried to meddle in the political affairs of Russia. I think we're gonna round it up there. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great pleasure to have you on to discuss this topic. I could talk about this for hours, if on end, and I never tire of talking about late Russian history. But I think we're gonna round it up there, and I do plan to revisit this topic in the future, of course. But before you go, do you have anything you want to promote and the links you want me to share in the description of this episode, or social media where people can find you if they have further questions? Where can people find your book, The Last Tsar? That's where you cover more of this in detail. Of course, we only touched the tip of the iceberg, so I would highly recommend reading the book as well. It's fabulous work on late Russian history and the life of Nicholas II and the abdication. But again, you talk about much more detail than what we did here today. So, where can people find the book? If you have social media you want to share, or links you want me to share in the description, please feel free to share them right now, and whatever else you want to share about this topic or anything else. Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you again so much for coming on. It's been a great pleasure to have you here today. And this has been With That Aged Well. You can find us on social media under With That Aged Well on Twitter or X, whatever it is called today, on Instagram or Blue Sky under With That Aged Well. We share latest news there and some other fun stuff. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you can find podcasts these days. If you are on YouTube, consider giving us 5 stars, and you can also leave a comment under our episode what you think about Nicholas and Alexandra and the abdication of the Romanov throne. Is there anything we missed that you feel we should have talked about? If you're on YouTube, of course, leave a comment. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, consider giving us 5 stars and a review as well, or other podcast platforms you may have been listening to. All the stuff that I said about. This has been With That Aged Well. My name is Alan. I'll see you next time.